So let's talk about AI more broadly, right? Do you think that AI will displace recruiters?
Short answer, no, but there will be disruption. Now, are the tasks going to be very different? Yeah, I think they will be. Certainly some of the tasks will be automated away because AI is better at doing them.
What would be the top tasks that you think will be automated away out of interest?
Transcribing one is already happening. That's already saving people time. And just to be clear, if you're saving teams time, that time you've saved is going to be like leveraged by the company in one of two ways. One is, well, these people are more effective now, so we can actually hire more of them because they can get through more work. The other approach is, hey, we've saved time. We actually need fewer of these people now. And so, of course, as a human being, and you need to think about, well, what are the skills that aren't going to be undermined by this technology, or basically aren't going to be done better by this technology?
Yes, as the CEO of a AI-oriented business, what is it that you are typically looking for in candidates? What really stands out to you? What gets you excited?
I'm heavy on...
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Open to Work podcast. Super delighted this week to be joined by Siadhal Magos, the CEO of Metaview. Hello, Siadhal. How's it going?
Very good, Matthew. Good to see you too. Excited to be on the pod.
Now, anyone who's a regular listener of this podcast probably already recognizes the name Metaview. And if you don't, then I haven't been doing my job properly. And I imagine Siadhal will take that conversation offline with me. But so why don't you start off by just introducing yourself in our kind of classic format of tell me about yourself, and then we'll get into the business in a bit more detail.
Sure. Siadhal, one of the co-founders and the CEO at a company called Metaview. We are a Series A stage startup. So that means factually, we're 20 people at the moment, aiming to grow very fast. We're doing a pretty good job at the moment. The company is really focused on helping recruiters and hiring teams leverage the power of AI in order to run better hiring processes. We'll talk a bit more about that. In terms of what I actually do here, so I focus on spreading the word about what we do. My background is more of a product background. So I was a product manager at Uber a number of years ago and a head of product at a startup before that. A bit of a mix really, where I have a bit of a product background, but now focus a lot on getting the word out there and letting people know about all the great work that we do at Metaview.
Mm-hmm. And so coming from like a product background, what led you to start a business in the recruiting space?
So I think it was a very happy sort of mix of almost like a very happy coincidence where, yes, I have a product background. The great thing about having a product background is you're just constantly thinking about how can you leverage the latest technology to solve problems in ways that they haven't been solved before. That is really the job of a product manager, is to sort of source all of the inputs, whether that's sort of desk research, whether that's talking to customers, whether that's talking with your colleagues about what, the art of the possible. So already very tuned to sort of to that concept. And at the same time, I was at the fastest growing company in the world, which was Uber at the time. And so everyone was, it was half of their job to hire. So I just actually found myself split between these two worlds of, not as a recruiter, but as a hiring manager, spending a lot of time, interviewing, debriefing, defining, then redefining sort of scopes for roles and what we're looking for, and all of that work that exists on the sort of the hiring company side of the table, while at the same time, obviously thinking about how we can leverage technology to solve problems. And so when you have those two experiences, you very quickly start to think, well, how could we leverage technology to improve how hiring happens? And our big takeaway, myself and my co-founder, was really where hiring happens a lot of the time is in conversations. And I would say it's the same on the candidate side of the table, right? They're really, a lot of how they're deciding whether this company is a good fit for me is what they learn during conversations with the people at that company. And we thought if we could start to leverage technology to improve those conversations, to improve the quality of the information that we extract from those conversations, we could not only, enable companies to hire more efficiently and more effectively, but also save them a ton of time, because right now there's just a bunch of laborious work in and around structuring that conversational data that humans no longer have to do.
Mm-hmm. And so if I'm a candidate kind of engaging with a business that's using Metaview, what am I likely to see and feel and hear, and how is that impacting how my decision about whether or not I should be hired is being made?
Yeah. So just on the experience, first of all, most candidates will go through an interview process, which is at least at the top of the funnel, the top of the interview process, predominantly a virtual process. So maybe you'll have a screen with a recruiter and then an interview with a hiring manager, and then maybe a couple more interviews before you potentially, depending on the company's culture, do an on-site interview. So during those virtual interviews, Metaview essentially appears almost as an additional participant within your interviews, and it's just there to be a scribe, to note down the important discussion points, just as a recruiter or the interviewer themselves would do during the interview themselves. So that's their job. And again, the way that it appears to the candidate is basically as an additional participant on the call. There's some small touch points before that moment, where as a candidate, you have the opportunity to let the organization know, do you want them to use this technology or not? But really the main experience you'll have is that there's this additional participant. In terms of how that data is used, I mean, really that's up to our customers. So again, if you sort of think in the pre-LLM world, the pre-AI, before this AI revolution that sort of started about 18 months ago, of course, people would be taking their notes manually during those calls, and they would use those notes in all sorts of ways to sort of debrief with other people involved in the hiring process, or just to store that information so the next person that interviews has some of that context. So people use these notes in all sorts of ways. It's just now they're far higher quality and far less prone to, maybe someone sort of scrappily writing that up at the end of the interview because they didn't manage to take the notes in real time, because Metaview does it very reliably. So it really focuses, our technology really focuses on what we think of as fact extraction. So what are the points that were the candidate shared that are almost facts about their background, facts about their preferences, facts about their skill set, so that we can make sure that information is there when recruiters, hiring managers, interviewers review your profile later on.
And so how do you think then this impacts the conversation around whether or not a candidate should get hired?
Fundamentally by making it more evidence-based. Many people that are candidates have also been on the other side of the table at some point. And so I think that there's, even if you haven't, I guess maybe I can sort of expand on to create some empathy for the hiring manager and interviewer situation. A lot of the time, of course, you're working really hard to fill a role because it's really important to you're probably currently covering the slack, as it were. You're picking up the slack of the fact that this person is not in the company right now, so I'm having to work extra or drop a few balls in other parts of my responsibilities. I'll ask a recruiter to go and find me, or a sourcer to go and find me a bunch of candidates, and I will speak to a number of them, right? I won't just speak to one. And of course, when you're sort of in the midst of doing your day job as a hiring manager, while also trying to hire for, one or many additional people in your team, it can get really hard to almost distinguish between all these candidates that you speak to over the course of, let's say, a week or 2 weeks. Because of course they can, you're just in the throes of your day job as well. And so one of the things that Metaview is really great for is it really sort of extracts the information in this really thorough and accurate way, attributes it to specific candidates, and means that when people do come to, hey, listen, now I'm going to decide which candidates to progress or which candidate to hire, you have really high quality evidence on which to make the decision, as opposed to your fuzzy memories or maybe even the feeling that you remember having when you were speaking to that person. So yeah, really about that evidence. We actually, when we started the company, we use this phrase less now. To be honest, no good reason. I would say it's just hasn't been something that's really become, part of our day-to-day lexicon. But the phrase that we used to use a lot was, we're powering hiring decisions with the truth. So one of the big reasons that I talked at the top of this conversation was really about making these higher quality hiring decisions. And that's in everyone's interest, because higher quality hiring decisions means you get candidates who join companies where this truly is a really great fit, which is good for the candidate and it's good for the hiring team. One of the reasons that's so hard, pre-Metaview, is it's really hard to actually have a firm grasp of all of the truth that you learned during the interview process when it comes to decision time. So I'd say that's really a core tenet of what we do, is you're powering these decisions with the truth, which is obviously great for, me as a hiring manager, because I feel more confident about the decision I'm making, but also great for the right candidate, because I can be confident that what I communicate during those interviews, which I've really sweated the details of that stuff, is actually there for the hiring team when they come to their decision.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of contextualize this in a slightly different way, right? Like when I've, we've both been in lots of debriefs for roles, and basically before like a tool like Metaview would have existed, when you have gone through the entire interview process as a candidate, essentially what happens behind the scenes is a bunch of people sit down, and ideally they sit down and go, okay, what do we think of this candidate? How do we rate them? Like, who's a hire? Who's not a hire? Why do you think, okay, you're not a hire. Why do you think you're not a hire? Like, okay, you think they should be hired. Why do you think they're a hire? And, regardless of whether or not you like or dislike that method, that's how it happens in lots of businesses still today. And I think one of the challenges in those conversations is that when someone states a perspective, it's really hard to understand whether or not that's true, whether or not it's opinion, whether or not it's assumption. And a lot of decisions on hires get made because of an assumption that wasn't factually stated.
Totally.
And so if you have a really good recruiter who's in that room at the time, they can go, oh, when did they say that? Why did they say that? Like, would you be able to kind of, can you reference in your notes why you feel like that's the case, or whether or not what indication do you have that that's the case? And a lot of the time you didn't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
Because there was no notes, because 90% of the time hiring managers weren't taking notes. And so now when you ask the question, why do you think that's the case? You can literally search like you would do any natural language prompt and say, hey, when, a Metaview AI, when did they talk about this topic? And you can get the exact extraction of the transcript or the summary. And I think that is a game changer for how recruiters are empowered to challenge and support hiring managers in the right way, and also like a broader level of accountability, so that we're not hiring based on assumptions. And it is like shocking how many decisions it massively influenced by the assumptions that the hiring teams have during the process based on tiny extracts of data that aren't then validated.
Yep.
And I think Metaview can really support with removing that.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Okay, so let's talk about AI more broadly, right? Like, you obviously sit in the kind of landscape of AI. Where are you seeing the kind of biggest strides being made across the kind of recruiting industry as it relates to AI?
Yeah, so there's obviously a lot of energy that goes in. There's a lot of, well, by energy, we sort of have this almost lexicon internally where we use energy, when a lot of the time what you sort of mean is money, because if you're putting energy into something as a business, it means you're putting money into it, you're putting people's time into it, you're hiring people to go and do this thing. So a lot of money, a lot of energy is going into essentially automated sourcing. Essentially automation at the very top of the funnel, which is not what Metaview does, just for what it's worth. But there's a couple of areas at the very top of the recruiting funnel where there's a lot of belief that maybe actually AI, or at least humans heavily assisted by AI, can do a better job than humans alone. So those two are sourcing. So, hey, I've got an idea for a type of person that I need in the company. Obviously, every human being on the planet is a three-dimensional unique snowflake, so it's not going to be absolutely perfect. But can AI go and get me a bunch of profiles? Because all these profiles live on the internet. So that's sort of one area where you're seeing a lot, really, because the sense in the reality in the midterm, I was going to say long term, but it's probably not long term, it's midterm, is that the job of the work of going to find profiles, 20, 50 profiles that match a job description, is sort of, in many cases, it can be quite rote, especially initially, where actually my job as a recruiter is just to almost calibrate the hiring manager on what's out there. I just want to get a bunch of profiles so we can speed up that calibration. So anyway, that's one, is sourcing profiles on the internet is a place where that's happening a lot. And then the other that I'd say is getting more and more, I don't know if I would say common, but at least people are really open to it, is application review. So AI assisted application review. Obviously, we're in a pretty employer favored market right now, in general. And so one of the sort of the consequences of that for a hiring organization that, really likes to make sure they review every application that they get in, is that suddenly you've got way more applications than you used to have. And so I'm seeing quite a lot of innovation around how AI can speed up that process of application review. It's not, again, we used the phrase earlier of black box. It's not the way I've seen this executed is not as a black box. It's more as a, listen, tell us what types of things for this particular role are really important for you to see on a resume or on a CV. And then the AI, will go and check which of these profiles we might want to accelerate or move to the top of the pile based on those rules that configuration that you've given me. So I think there's an interesting mix of sort of human and machine in the application review world as well. So yeah, I think it tends to be at the top of the funnel where most of this is happening. And then you get things at the bottom of the hiring funnel, which is predominantly driven by conversations, where it's really about summarization, structuring, and, information extraction at the time that you need it, which is obviously where we focus.
Yeah, and I think if you look at like a lot of the narrative around AI, it's broadly speaking like how can we make people more efficient, not how can we like take away the jobs. Although I'd love to hear your take on that as it relates to recruiting. But one of the the three most manual aspects of I could probably categorize four actually now that I'm just thinking them in my head. But let's just say the most manual aspects of a recruiter's job is sifting through the top of the funnel, one either proactively or through passive incoming applications. I'd say organizing hiring managers and hiring teams. And like, honestly, I can't stress the amount of effort that goes into organizing hiring managers and organizing interviewers, and like not just talking about coordination, but hey, have you submitted your notes, which obviously Metaview can support with, hey, have you done this, hey, have you done this task, just task chasing, and obviously, and then coordination as well are kind of being really core aspects of what we're looking to streamline. And if you can take away significant hours, I would say almost, and then obviously you have candidate management, etc., which I think businesses are trying to overly automate. I actually don't think that's the area of optimization for me, because having good candidates want good candidate experience and want to be handheld. And I think if you overly automate that part of the experience for white collar jobs, especially for senior white collar jobs, you are going to lose out on good candidates. And so finding that balance, I think, is really important. But I think that top of funnel piece is probably the next kind of is one of the big focuses, as well as this down funnel piece that you're focusing on as well. Alderson James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TX. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained, and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all. So a couple of quick fire questions. Do you think that AI will displace recruiters?
Short answer, no. But there will be disruption. So recruiters, so let's think about what recruiters are responsible for. Recruiters are responsible for getting amazing people in companies as quickly as possible. The best companies, or frankly, all companies, are always going to be seeking alpha. They're always going to be seeking differentiation to achieve that. And so putting a human at least in the loop for that is going to be a thing. Now, are the tasks going to be very different? Yeah, I can totally believe they may well. I think they will be. Certainly, some of the tasks will be automated away because AI is better at doing them.
What would be the top tasks that you think will be automated away out of interest?
I mean, transcribing one is already happening. That's already saving people time. And just to be clear, if you're saving, just to be frank, if you're saving teams time, that time you've saved is going to be like leveraged by the company in one of two ways. One is, these people are more effective now, so we can actually hire more of them because they can get through more work, and all of a sudden the economics change. So some companies will take that approach of, listen, engineers are 10x more valuable than they were before because they can actually build, we can have one engineer build a whole product that we then sell to a whole market or something like this, and so let's hire more of them. The other approach that many companies will take is, hey, we've saved time. We actually need fewer of these people now. So that is going to throughout all of these things, when you think about where this automation is occurring, you should think that time that's now no longer needs to be done by a human being. It can go either way. And so, of course, as a human being you need to think about, what are the skills that aren't going to be undermined by this technology, or basically aren't going to be done better by this technology. So transcribing is certainly one of them. I think that, funnily enough, I think people talk about the automation of scheduling for so long, and it's such a tough thing, because
people always assume it's so easy to do,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
can't stress enough how hard it is to do.
I think it's like the 80-20 situation, because okay, finding a slot in someone's calendar, that's obviously easy. That's a solved problem. Knowing that actually Siadhal doesn't mind moving his one-to-one with James, but really dislikes moving his one-to-one with Sally. So, you can move this one, but not that one in order to find a slot for this person. And if it's for this really important role, we can prioritize that over these other things. But if it's one of these other roles, actually, I'm not going to prioritize that over this, my weekly design review. So it's like there's all of that goes into, when someone asks me, hey, Sal, can you do this meeting at this time? That's everything that goes on in my head. And that's really hard to actually just codify, of course.
Companies have attempted to automate this for a pretty long time, like over a decade. And I see new businesses come along that attempt to do this, and they think that it's a great thing that they can help solve. And I'm like, I promise you, if they come to me for advice on their product build, I'm like, I promise you, it's way harder than you think it is. I wouldn't recommend getting too deep down this road, because it is A, congested, and B, essentially unsolvable, really, unless your entire business ingests into and works in a very consistent way. But I've never ever seen that happen. Like the ability to schedule with a CEO on for a call with a top candidate that has to be accelerated, otherwise you're going to lose the candidate, and all that nuance and all that context. You just can't do that with technology, unfortunately. And I think it'll be a long time before we're able to do it like that, if at all.
Yeah. But that said, I think technology has made strides to making that less of a cluster. Let's be clear. There are really great scheduling tools out there that help the people who are responsible for getting on people's calendars do it more effectively, and therefore you need fewer of these people. So that's just the reality again. So transcription is one. I think scheduling is help, but it's very hard to fully automate. I also think, to be honest, the transcription thing, just to be clear, we don't fully automate. The really important part of writing up interviews is the feedback, is the actual judgment. Hey, what does this mean about their suitability for the role? And that's, of course, not something that we automate. So I think what you'll hear across the board, really, and I'll share a few more in a second, is that I think, let's just use 80-20 as like the principle here. There's like this 80-20. It's very similar to how people use ChatGPT a lot of the time, is get me off a blank page. Like, how can I go from nothing to something that means I can just tweak and improve and, and change and edit? So same thing for sourcing, right? There's a bunch that you can do by, getting a bunch of candidates that potentially might be suitable, of course, based on your interaction with those profiles. Yes, this is a fit. No, this is not for this reason, or whatever it might be. You can then tweak, and you might decide to sort of go down the rabbit hole yourself, because at some point it becomes more efficient to do so. I think that's almost true across the board.
Re-elevating your own database. I think the ability to natural language search within your own database, like one of the biggest problems that ATS's applicant tracking systems has had, is that essentially every single role is like unless you're really good at categorizing your system, every single role and every single candidate is almost like a unique instance. And that's how they're treated, because they're so hard to search historically. And so being able to natural language search and prompt through a database, which is probably one of the best uses of these sorts of tools, is going to have an incredible impact over the next few years, and will mean that these systems become more valuable and more impactful. And let's be clear, we talked about the ATS a bunch of different times. I don't, to come back to your earlier point, just because we didn't talk about it, AI is not making the decision about whether or not you should move through to the next stage. It hasn't. There's no real systems out there that we've seen that could do this. It might help stack rank. It might help prioritize. You look at certain candidates first, but the person who makes that decision is a human. And there's very, very few systems out there that I've seen that are making that decision for you. And I have quite a good couple of anecdotes that essentially said that a CEO was using an AI CV review tool, and all of the CVs that it pulled out were ones that were also written by AI, and they ended up not being relevant for the role because they weren't an effective demonstration of their skills. And so that ended up costing the business time. And that could be a whole episode in and of itself, but
yeah, totally aligned. Yeah, I don't certainly Metaview, but also a lot of the other tools that I'm seeing are not about decisioning. And again, I think that's very healthy. In some parts of the world, that's codified in law as well, which I think is good. So yeah.
We are delighted to be sponsored by Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations like interviews, intakes, and debriefs, and then provides a perfectly summarized note of everything that was discussed. That means that you can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. I've spoken to so many recruiters and recruiting leaders who are loving using Metaview across their organizations. It's saving them time, but it also means that they have more data to make better decisions. So for every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can now make confident and informed decisions, and recruiters can finally take control of the interview process. The impact on candidate experience is also massive. Since recruiters don't have to worry about taking notes in the moment, they can really focus on being present and engaged with you. Forward-thinking recruiters at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora are all leveling up their interviews with Metaview. So head on over to metaview.ai/open to work to get started for free on your first 5 calls. I think let's talk about that just for 1 second. That was my next quickfire question was like around the AI's ability to exacerbate bias in recruiting. How do you think about this in the context of, I guess, let's just talk about Metaview. Like, how do you think about Metaview's role in leading the witness?
Our approach to it is, I guess I want to say conservative. Without wanting to sound like we're massive believers in the technology. It is going to shift how work gets done. There's a ton that you can do without having to make hiring decisions, make hiring suggestions, and all those things. So I think there's almost like there's a low-hanging fruit sort of approach to this. Like, what are all the obvious things that clearly we don't want humans to be spending their time doing this, and it would be great. Everyone appreciates it when AI starts to do it. We play very much in that world at the moment, which is, we do things that people wish they didn't have to do. In the case of recruiters, mainly, but also hiring managers. When it comes to now, what we do see on the margins, maybe some of our more advanced users or more experimental users, is they will give our AI as much context as they can in order to help them detect things that are hard for them to identify. It sounds like I'm sort of talking in abstract terms, so let me just bring that sort of closer to home. So let's say you have 5 or 6 interviews with a candidate. You're at the final stage of the process. There's various ways you can use our product to find information across all 5 interviews, or maybe 10 interviews if you're looking at 2 candidates, or so on and so on. You can sort of like, hey, where are the examples where we learned about their motivation? Because I want to make sure I mention those things during my offer call to them. And so I would just go through all 5 conversations. What are the most common things they talked about in terms of what's motivating them for their next role, so I can really nail my offer. So that's like an example of me as the human being sort of expressing to the AI, I'm trying to find this information, go and get it for me so I can operate better. The next step to that is, hey, listen, I've actually got this rubric that, again, I have identified. I'm saying that these are the most important things to me from a hard background perspective. They must have had leadership experience of, leading at least a team of at least 5 people. They have to have sold into the, cybersecurity market. They have to have sold, deals over this size, a series of hard facts about the candidate's background that I might then say, and then I might also script, hey, and based on how many of these things they satisfy, let me know whether they're a 5 out of 5 or a 4 out of 5 or a 3 out of 5 and so on. And so you're getting closer to these things where the user's input is generating, the user's request gets an answer, And so this is what I mean by, as long as we all understand that the accountability for the hiring decision is going to be the humans, I think as long as you hold that line pretty firm, depending on the role, I think there may be other roles. We play mainly in sort of like white collar creative work is the sort of roles that people are hiring for in our world. Maybe there are other types of roles where you will just outsource it to AI. But in our world, as long as you understand that the final decision is yours, then actually there's a bunch you can do that, depending on how you want to interact with this very flexible technology, you can still get things that amount to, I don't want to say recommendations, because I don't think they are recommendations, but essentially almost like scoring based on your curriculum, scoring based on your criteria.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I sort of, it ultimately comes down to how good the user is. And I kind of get a bit concerned about that, especially having worked in like larger businesses that have bigger legal teams that, I think will be really risk averse to these sorts of approaches, because that as soon as it looks like you're being led towards a decision, unless you have really robust AI policies and usage policies, and that you use that exact same structure for every single role, you can very quickly be accused of not being, whilst you make the final decision, if you're being too influenced by AI, that could have diversity and inclusion implications and stuff like that, which is codified into certain laws around the world.
Really great point. And that's exactly, this is like a little bit this is a little bit sort of specific to Metaview and our strategy and stuff like that, which may or may not be interesting. But I think that's exactly why what you'll see is more what we think of as like workflow specific AIs. So some of the listeners may have had experience like using Zoom's inbuilt AI capabilities or Microsoft Teams inbuilt AI capabilities. And sort of the most obvious thing you can have is, well, those are huge companies with amazing smart people and huge teams who are building these things. Why do I end up with sort of almost workflow or use case specific AIs? And exactly what you described is an example of a reason, because there are these very important but almost like esoteric requirements that if you want to use an AI within the context of making a hiring decision, there are a bunch of laws you need to consider. There's a bunch of other systems you need to integrate with. There are a bunch of just like low level user empathy sort of considerations given they're trying to make a hiring decision, which is actually a really good thing for the market, because it means you get actually the right guardrails in place on products like ours, because obviously we're going to spend the time understanding whether it's those laws or regulations or even just preferences of our users. So even right now, for example, there's various bits of data that our product captures, and you can toggle those things based on our customers will toggle those things based on their posture, their appetite as a company. Some will capture the video, some won't. Some will capture the audio, some won't. Some will want to keep the data for, 2 years. Some will want to keep the data for 2 weeks. And it's all totally fine. And it's almost, we have to do those things. We want to do them also, but we have to because the customers want them and because the regulation determines it.
Yeah. And final question, I guess, as the CEO of a AI-oriented business, what is it that you are typically looking for in candidates? What really stands out to you? What gets you excited?
I'm heavy on, I guess, in like broad strokes, like attitude, essentially. I mean, it's really hard to build like I say, we're 20 people now. We have really big ambitions. We want to build a really significant company. And doing that from this stage, it takes a certain level of your work life needs to be a really large part of your sort of your life right now, and so I think that's a big one that we often seek out. I think there was certainly a period where it's sort of almost seen as trendy or fun to join startups. Maybe it still is. I think it still has that sort of a certain shine to it. But I think really figuring out the people who are really going to go the extra mile is a big thing for us. Curiosity is really key on 2 dimensions for us. One is the technology is shifting so quickly. Like literally, to the point that I probably, frankly, wish I could stay more up to date. To be honest with you, just with all the other pressures on my time, I don't always, know exactly what's in the latest, Claude release or the latest Claude model versus the latest OpenAI model. And so it's really hard to stay on top of those things. So where I do sort of manage is that because I'm actually curious about these things. I'm actually really interested. It's incredibly exciting that these things are happening. Obviously in my like free time or my, pajama time just from going to bed or whatever, I'll read about these things because it's super interesting. So I think that's a real big win when we find people who sort of have those similar interest levels. And the other reason curiosity is so important is because frankly, we have a really high bar for product quality, design quality, these sorts of things. It's again another cliche, but there is something for sure to be said about tasting nice things. You need to be curious out there, trying other products, checking out how other people do things that are slightly analogous or different, but actually you can take inspiration from. Because I think that really accelerates your ability to build something that's, especially in this world where you're building novel capabilities, it accelerates your ability to do it well when you're actually checking out basically how other people are doing things and how did they solve this problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Okay, well, if you are interested in getting a job at Metaview, now you have a bit of an insight in what Sal might be looking for. I couldn't agree more with curiosity. I think it's one of the ones that candidates we talk about a lot in our candidate journeys, a kind of episode stream. It's how far can you push me in your questions? How far can you demonstrate that you've gone that above and beyond to research and understand fundamentally our business? And that often kind of is, I always find a really good leading indicator of whether or not someone is going to be asking me the right questions as either their boss or as a team member, which I love. Alrighty. And so, Sal, if we want to learn more about Metaview, if we want to learn more about you and follow you online, where can we find you?
Metaview.ai is the website. So go and check it out. And if you're, you learn more about the product over there. There's also a bunch of good resources about how AI is being leveraged within recruiting if you head over to the resources section. So we'll definitely check that out. For me, LinkedIn is probably the place where I spend most time. So there's not any other people with my name. So I guess you can see how that's spelt in the show notes and whatnot. Feel free to connect.
Awesome. And that's a wrap for our latest episode of the Open to Work podcast. Thank you so much for joining. For those listeners, obviously we're talking a lot about, how to navigate this kind of job search, and we're kind of continuing to be supporting you. And thank you, Sal, for being such a great sponsor of this podcast. It's so important that there's like in-depth and valuable resources out there from trusted people who kind of have been in that seat, and that really is kind of the ethos, and really appreciate kind of from all of us here, I guess, at the Open to Work podcast, thank you for being a supporter of that philosophy and of kind of supporting people and getting back to work in this really challenging market. So thank you for that.
Oh, man, making me blush. Pumped to be part of it. And you're doing great work, Matthew. So keep it up.
Thank you. And if you have any questions for any of our guests, please write into us at opentoworkpod@gmail.com. And also, if you have kind of questions for me directly and for the kind of job search advisors, check out Open to Work Community, our new kind of paid resource for premium access to insights directly from job search advisors who all come from the backgrounds of recruiting. I'll be on there as well. It's $35 a month, and it's an absolute steal for kind of the quality of resources you get in there. And there's also a 5-day free trial now as well, so you can jump in and check it out before you make your purchase. So just head over to opentowork.community and check out the full platform there. Until next time, and Sal, I'm sure I'll see you on the circuit, and thank you so much for joining us again today.
Thanks, man.